Okay, so we are live, and I am Lisa Kastner. I'm the founder and executive editor of Running Wild Press and our imprint RIZE. And this is Chris, quote unquote, Harriet Major, who is one of our amazing editors and authors. And we are here with you every Wednesday at 4 p.m. Pacific time, 7 p.m. Eastern time. This is your chance to literally just ask us whatever you want. We love your questions. We love going through every week and looking through the comments and just seeing, like, what kind of questions do you have for us? What's going on? All that kind of stuff. Alicia Delory says, hey, Alicia.
Hi there.
Awesome to see you, and congratulations. So Alicia's memoir, Something is Better Than Nothing, actually went live on March 15th of this week. And she had one of the most amazing celebration cakes I've ever seen in my entire life. And her book was a featured book in BookBub. So if you guys are interested in checking it out, you should go check out BookBub. It is it's one of the top ones. So
Congratulations.
and she's pretty awesome. Alicia is pretty awesome. So if you guys have any questions for Chris or I, all you got to do is go ahead and pop it in the comments section. I'll just go ahead and repeat the question. So then, and then we'll respond. So with that, I'm trying to think if we've got any really interesting news this week. I've had tons of emails. We've been preparing a lot for some upcoming books that are going to be coming out in the next few months. One of them is Whales Swim Naked by Eric Gethers. So that one's going to be phenomenal.
Okay.
You guys have to check it out. We're actually right now working on the audio book with Blackstone Publishing, which I'm so crazily excited for. Eric and I just approved the voice actor for that novel, so that'll be fantastic. I also just had a meeting with Vanessa Carlisle. We're going to be putting her book out. I believe it's in June of this year, and that one is called Take Me With You. It is also another incredible book that you're just going to have to check out. I would actually love, and Chris, I'd love actually your opinion on this. So I was thinking, for RIZE, I feel like we should have a short story anthology every year with RIZE and a novella anthology. What do you think about that? Does that sound
I think that's an excellent idea. Because I know back in like George R.R. Martin, I think, and Stephen King talked about, like, back in the day there used to be a journal strictly for science fiction and horror and stuff like that. And especially since RIZE is doing genre fiction, I think that'd be an excellent idea.
I mean, we could even have it where it's segmented out, like it's one short story collection of genres, but like the first section's horror and the second section's
right,
like sci-fi, and the third section's fantasy or something like that.
Yeah, I think it'd be a good idea. That's a good one.
Okay, because when we first started Running Wild, what we did was, how we found authors a lot of the time was through the short stories and the novellas. So in some cases, literally what I would do is I would reach out to an author and say, this short story is pretty amazing. I think you should use it, make it into a novel. Like, have you thought about that? And use this as the primary storyline.
Right.
And like I said, we actually had quite a few people come back with like really phenomenal novels based on the short story that they had originally submitted. And even with the novellas, we had a couple people who created novella series based on the first novella that they sent us. So
okay,
yeah, I think it can be a really great opportunity all around.
Yeah, I think so too. I think that's an excellent idea, especially sometimes people want to write books but kind of don't know where to start. And if you have kind of a starting point with a short story, and to kind of expand that, I think that also help a lot of writers kind of do that and get a book length project together. So yeah, I definitely think that's a good idea. especially with the sections. Um, yeah, I think that's a good one.
Okay, cool. Awesome. That's awesome. Okay. Now, Chris, for everybody who's watching, was also kind enough to pull together some questions for us to bat around. Do you want to ask me, or do you want me to ask, or?
Sure, I can ask. Let me
Okay.
get them pulled up here. All right. Let's check my email. Okay. Let me see. So someone looking to start their own publishing company, what kind of information would you share with them as far as pitfalls and kind of things to look out for, obstacles to look out for, so that they kind of avoid some mistakes you may have made just getting started and not necessarily knowing everything that goes into running a publishing company?
Oh yeah, sure. So I actually initially I did a lot of research because I wanted to do a couple things right off the bat. So one thing is I wanted us to be really efficient, and I wanted it to be very all virtual based, so that you know we could have an author in Taiwan working with an editor in New York, and have a way for them to talk, like to interact, without them having to be on the phone or having to have a meeting or whatever, right? So, and I also wanted to make sure that from a distribution and a like a book creation perspective, right? So actual book printing, that it was basically print on demand. Now, one thing people get confused a lot, because when print on demand was first a thing, they had in their minds like going to FedEx, right? Going to FedEx, Kinko's, right, and getting a book printed.
Right.
That's not really print on demand today. Print on demand today is you do have an electronic file, you get an electronic proof. That electronic proof is then used as the basis for paperback, hardback, and so on. But the turnaround time is crazy fast. You can get 50, 100 books printed in a couple of days now, versus it would take like a month minimally back in the day, because you would actually have to set up plates, like actual presses, right? In order to get this kind of thing done. So I wanted to make sure that we had something that was cost effective. It would be fast to set up. We'd be able to get digital proofs. Again, that we wouldn't be reliant on a print proof, right? But we could actually, proof the book digitally. I wanted to make sure that we had very professional looking covers and they were cost effective. And then I wanted to, at least initially, be able to have the printer and the distributor be seamless, right? Because there are plenty of companies that offer printing services, and there are plenty of companies that offer distribution services, but there aren't that many companies that offer both. So with all that in mind, I actually went on, I think I would say I spent a solid year doing research.
Okay, that's good. That's good information.
Yeah, because of all those reasons. And I wanted it to be something where it wouldn't cost a lot to stand things up. So if we wanted to, expand quickly, then we could. If we needed to retract for whatever reason, then we could. And it wouldn't be anything that would, from like a day-to-day perspective, it wouldn't be significant, if that makes sense. So at the time, I actually recruited an old friend of mine, Jade Blackwater, and I asked her if she would come on board and help me stand things up. So we came up with all the processes for, finding new books. And, I wanted to make sure that there was it wasn't like someone was emailing me personally to send a submission, right? I wanted to make sure it was like a very commonly used platform. So that's why we use Submittable. So, before you start a press, just think about what's important to you. Like, why are you starting it? What does it look like?
Sorry.
Oh, no, you're fine.
Okay.
You know, what does it look like from a cost perspective? What does it look like? What kind of distribution do you want? Do you want it to be global? Do you want it to just be local? Do you want it to be North America? Think about how do you want to be perceived in the market, right? What will be your um, what's your branding, right? That was also very
Right.
important from the very beginning. And know what you are going to be focused on. So for us, it was obvious that it would be great stories with great writing that don't fit neatly in a box, right?
Right.
Because the whole inspiration for this was just knowing so many amazing authors who literally could not get published because their stuff didn't fit into whatever that standard process was or whatever the standard story was
Right.
by the big five or by, you know, pre-established publications. So um so all that, right? Now, some of the, I wouldn't say pitfalls, but some things to think about. One is that you can write the most amazing story ever. And if you don't do marketing and it doesn't get reviewed and you don't have it on well known blogs, stuff like that, like you're not hitting up podcasts, all that, it doesn't matter how brilliant the story is. You
Right.
have got to get it out there. You know,
And
stuff.
that's one thing I was telling my friend, because I'm asking because I have a college buddy who's looking to start a publishing company,
Mhm.
and that's one thing. And he's extremely niche. I think he's doing he's like him and some other people are doing like spiritual nonfiction, kind of like publishing sermons and stuff like that.
Mhm.
And he was asking some questions. I was telling him like that's extremely niche. So you have to know how to tap into, that marketplace. And that's a strangely specific marketplace too. So it's about, you can write the best thing, like you said, you can write the best thing in the world, but if you don't find your specific marketplace, a lot of people think, books in the marketplace in general is where they go. It's like, no, there's a sect within that you have to go to and tap into that. And the more niche it is, the more kind of genre specific it is, the smaller that market's going to be. There's some, like we said, there's broad ones: horror, sci-fi, romance. But it's definitely about tapping into your marketplace and knowing who they are, and I would even go as far as to say why they're buying and why they're in that marketplace, so you know how to market to them.
And so to your point, right? Like I actually intentionally published a book that I wrote first because I wanted to be my own guinea pig, right? And I
Right.
hired someone to put me on a blog tour, all that kind of stuff. And guys, don't do that. I'm gonna say that right now. Like,
Right.
I quickly realized that all the blogs were built bullshit, right? They were actually all like stood up by the person who
Right.
was running the blog tour. So they had no followers. Nobody actually cared, right? I mean, like I was sharing these blog reviews all over the place, right? But the reality was it was basically just being shared among my own friends and followers. So, to Chris, to your point, you really need to understand, it's smarter to go ahead and do your own research and research the blogs and the podcasts and the conferences and the audiences that would be most interested in your stories, and then focusing on that instead of hiring like I also, when we got best of 2019, right, for two of our novels, well, a novel and a memoir, I hired someone to get all of us on radio shows. And you know what? In retrospect, that was dumb. I should have just done it myself, because you can
Right.
pitch to radio shows yourself. Because what they did is they just pitched us to all these AM radio stations. Well, guess what? That meant there were 3 people probably listening to the radio show.
Right.
I mean, it may have made everyone's egos feel great, but
Right.
the
Right.
reality is it didn't really do a lot. Um, so, it's being willing to, you as the author, to dig in and to do your homework and to find this stuff out. Or maybe, find somebody who is curious about this stuff, but you need to be able to come into it with the list of, you know, my story's based in New Orleans and it's about zombies and it's, you know, a female led character. So it's, you know, very feminist or whatever the case may be, right? You need to be able to list all that out and then based on that, figure out how you can position your story to be pitched all over the place, right? Because
Right.
that's really what is going to get people to be aware of your story, to be aware of you, and to go ahead and pick it up. And I wish, so Jade actually kept saying to me, Lisa, you need to spend more money on marketing. You need to spend more money on marketing. And she was 100% right. But a lot of it is so much, it's more than just spending the money on marketing. It's doing that niche homework so that you know that the marketing that you're doing is effective.
Right.
Because otherwise you are just throwing, may as well just take that money and throw it down the toilet. Because honestly, you know, more people are going to see it going down that toilet than probably saw it on
Right.
those, you know, blogs that don't actually exist, that have no fan base.
Right.
Know?
And you have to know how your marketplace consumes information too, so you can get it to them through that channel. Because if most of your kind of potential readers are Facebook users, you don't want to spend a bunch of money on Twitter or you know other kind of avenues to feed them information. So it would definitely, that's why it does take a lot of research and knowing, you know, how they're consuming information, where they're taking it in from. Yeah. So that's definitely important.
And it's also so all of that, as well as so I was actually just having this conversation with a friend of mine the other day. You know, there are certain countries right now that are considered up and coming markets because they have huge populations, and you know, now more and more people are having access to cell phones, and because they have cell phones now, like every cell phone now has, you know, internet access.
Right.
And so an example of that would be India, right? An enormous population, and almost everybody has a cell phone. The reality is, though, it's still incredibly poor. Like someone could live in the shacks. And by the way, I have been there. I've been to the slums of India because I used to lead teams, and the core of my team was based out of Mumbai and Bangalore.
Oh, that's cool.
And so, but the slums in India are not like the slums in the US. The slums in India are literally shacks. I mean, like metal walls that have like these, they have no heat. And basically they're stealing electricity from a neighboring area. So it's like being hung like from the ceiling.
Oh, wow.
But these people work. It's not that they don't have jobs, right? They are just not well compensated. And
right.
So, but the kids may have cell phones. So you need to, instead of, in that instance, when you're looking at that and saying, oh, look, you know, India is a huge potential market, you need to understand what you're saying when you say that, right? What are they spending their money on? What do they have money to spend on, right?
Right.
Do they have a large amount of money to spend on what would be considered, you know, do they have a lot of money that they can spend on whatever they want? You know, you need to be aware of all of these things when you are making these choices in terms of where you are going to focus your marketing. And you also need to understand, you know, what kind of influence, what do they care about, even in terms of influence, right? Because maybe there may be a perception when you first look into it and say, oh yes, obviously India is a huge potential market, but it's quite possible that the story that you're trying to sell, they don't care about.
Right.
And so you need to be aware of that as well. So it's really being smart about how you are targeting your markets, how you're identifying those niche markets, and not being, and unfortunately, Americans, we have a tendency to be very American centric, and we make assumptions about other cultures based on the American culture.
That's a good point.
And you know, that means that you have just set yourself up to fail by doing that, right? So you need to take the time to do your homework and understand the other cultures and what's important from a generational perspective, from, you know, a regional perspective, monetary perspective, all of that, and then intelligent decisions on what you're going to focus on, or and where you're going to focus. So,
Right.
Leonard Pig says, I've known some indie writers that sold and promoted their wares at comic conventions. You know what, Leonard? That's an excellent point. I actually know several people who've done that as well. And if you talk to the president of Quirk Books, Brett Cohen, Quirk Books, before they started having representation at comic books, they stayed very small. And it was really when they first went to a comic book convention, and I think it was with Pride and Prejudice and Zombies, that they blew up. They became huge. And that's when they realized that, that more, that American, pop culture was really where they needed to keep their focus. So that's all. That is an awesome point. So thank you for that. That's a great point. And actually, it's a great example of someone saying, you know what, let me look into, I may not be selling comic books, right? But I think that this is the same. It's, I'm doing a cross market here, right? The same people who would be interested in these kinds of comics would also be interested in like a zombie story. So let me try it out and see what happens. So
right.
Yeah. So yep. So marketing, and then in terms of distribution, again, we initially sat down and said, you know what, we're gonna just go with the distributor who is associated with the printer, right?
Right.
And the downfall with that is you don't really get a sales force. So what I mean by that is, when you cut a deal with a distributor, the distributors typically have a sales force that they go behind all the titles. And when you put your title out there, you provide them, all your digital files, ebook copies of the ebooks. You provide them descriptions of the books. You provide them book covers, blah, blah, blah. That sales force then looks at it and says, hey, you know what? I represent, the Pacific Northwest. I think that this would sell really well in this subset of the Pacific Northwest, right? So, and then they'll go out and they'll go hit up all the different bookstores and libraries or whatever they represent, and pitch your books to those places. So and then what you do at that point is then provide it for like pre-sale. You provide books like sample copies to them as well. So that can be huge for you, because then you're not, all the marketing isn't dependent on necessarily on you as a team or as a publisher, and your authors aren't really heavily dependent and heavily dependent on your authors. You now have a whole sales force behind you. That said, you and your authors have to be willing to do that homework that we already talked about, and to sit down and figure out, like, what are the niches, right? Who are the most likely? Because you want to be able to provide all that kind of information to the sales force so that it is as easy as possible for them to sell it.
Right.
Right.
Right. Right.
So those I think are the two biggest, I'd say, learning curves that we had in the last, because this is our fifth year, our fifth anniversary. So I'd say those were the two biggest learning curves that we had in the last 5 years, and we're actually addressing it now. Oh, and I'd say the third would be to go after audio books sooner. We didn't actually start putting having our books put in as audio books until, I'm going to say, last year or the year before. And we only cut our first deal, did our first partnership with Blackstone literally this year. Like, it's in process now.
Right.
Before that, we just worked with Amazon, and which means that the book releases were limited to Amazon instead of being available, like even through your public library. And that's a downfall. That's a limitation that I wish we didn't have. So I think starting to look at things from that viewpoint and thinking along those lines also is something that we probably should have started doing earlier. So
I just so on Kindle or Amazon, sometimes you get depending on your membership, you get to read books for free.
mhm.
Um, how does that work for maybe the author or even the publisher on that end? How is there, if that happens, how does the author, how does revenue get generated?
It doesn't. You're getting it for free.
Ah,
Yeah, we
okay.
don't see a dime when they do that. So like
Oh wow.
an example would be like, so part of the reason with audiobooks, ACX or Audible, they have that deal where you buy credits, right?
Hmm.
And you
Yeah.
get a bunch of credits for free. So if someone buys one of our audiobooks to listen to with a free credit, then we don't actually get paid. We don't
Wow.
get paid unless um, they are listening to it using credits that they paid for.
Oh, I did not know that. Because
Mm-hmm.
I listen to a lot of, it's actually, that's the only way I read, through audiobooks. And I didn't know that. Now it's because I do want to support the writers. Now I kind of know how that works, because I didn't even know how that works.
Yeah, because Amazon, I mean, they have that kind of power, right?
Right, right,
Now, versus like if you do it through a public library, right? The public library is actually purchasing it, right? And that's why they have a limited number available. But if you're doing it through like an Audible, it's a whole different beast. So
wow, that's a lot of power for
it's a lot of power.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
that's crazy. So yeah, and I actually know, I thought books were, to be honest, like donated to libraries. Honestly, I didn't know they paid for them.
I mean, they can be donated, but uh, if like hardbacks,
Hmm.
yeah, no, they're all bought. Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. How would somebody go about, a publisher go about marketing that to a library, to get them to, because that's a market too, to get them to
Right.
put it in their bookshelf.
That's right. So there's actually a distributor called not Blackstone, Baker and Taylor, and Baker and Taylor actually partners with other distributors. Then they supply Baker and Taylor supplies all books to all public libraries. I'm not sure about private; it might be private as well. And
Hmm.
so what happens is like, so in our case, we have a new distributor called SPU. SPU has a salesperson who works directly with Baker and Taylor, and they then will pitch our books to Baker and Taylor to be included in their distribution catalog, I guess you could say. And then
Right,
Baker and Taylor provides that out to the libraries, and then the libraries decide if they're going to pick it up or not.
right, right. Okay, okay. That's good to know. Let's see. I have another question.
Oh, I was going to ask you something, which,
Okay.
what was I going to ask you? And keep going. We'll record and it'll come back to me.
Right. Let me see here. Can we see? Mm. I know when you started the press, it was to get stories that didn't fit neatly in the box.
Mm-hmm.
But Running Wild Press, how did you come up with that name? That the name, as opposed to something, like Wild Stories or something like that.
For some reason, I always had this mental image of someone just kind of running free through like a field with a bunch of
Yeah.
red pens in their hand, and
Oh,
which I
nice.
thought was hilarious.
Yeah.
But it's what felt like, because uh, it's what felt like was the right metaphor for what we were doing, and
Yeah,
so
I think so.
yeah. So running wild, it just felt like it was the right metaphor, the right representation of what we were really kind of going after. So
Yeah, I like the image. It kind of reminds me of the NBA logo with Jerry West on it. I don't know. It's kind of where it takes me. So I like it. I think it's a good name and the logo. I think you did a good job on that one. I liked it a lot.
yeah, and then for Rise, Andrea came up with it because of, again, the metaphor of rising people up, and rising those stories up so that they get the fans that they deserve. So
Right.
mhm.
All right. That's cool. That's cool. So When you did start the imprint, the RIZE imprint, um, uh, how long did it take to kind of establish the structure for that in order to kind of go live with it and to, present it to people and say, hey, we're open for submissions. We can take those now, and start the production process on taking a story, getting it edited, marketing it, putting it out.
So in terms of the process, it was like that because we basically just leveraged everything that we had already put into place with Running Wild. It was more around people.
Right.
So I wanted to make sure that we had people who were representative of the groups that we were going to publish through RIZE instead of, it getting absorbed under Running Wild. I get I'm listening to a novel right now that is set in the Old West, and there's a character in it who's a little kid and who is of like Mexican descent. And the voiceover person or the voice person is using a cliched speech pattern.
Right.
And a lot of what the kid is saying is very, very cliched, right?
Right.
And it might just be because I'm listening to it versus like reading it,
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't want us to fall into that where because someone doesn't know any better, they don't understand a culture, they don't understand a time period that we inadvertently publish, cliched stories and cliched characters.
Right.
I wanted it to be more true representation, even if it is a, sci-fi story or a fantasy novel, right? Like,
right.
I wanted it to be, like the kind of stuff that like a Lavelle publishes or a Matt Johnson or, because they really do publish, technically speaking, they are more genre stories. Or a Nettie. Like I freaking love Nettie's dark fiction. Yeah. It's freaking phenomenal. But they all are also within those stories. You will find social commentary, and for me, something that's always been important in that is more than just the social commentary, but also I personally believe that a lot of bias exists out of ignorance.
Right.
And when someone comes to someone else and says something out of complete, that's just totally racist or sexist or whatever, right? And if you go forward or I go forward and I'm like, that was freaking sexist, right? Or that was freaking racist. The person's initial response is going to be defensiveness, right? Because nobody sits here and says, you know what I want to do today? Today, I want to be called a sexist. Or today, I think I should be called a racist. I don't know a single person who wakes up in the morning and says, hot damn, that's what I want to happen, right?
Right.
But you can effectively break through someone whose patterns are sexist or racist, right? Or fascist or whatever the case may be. If you present to them that behavior in story and you enable them to then understand through story, like, oh my God, that's awful.
Right. And sometimes they can even see themselves like in that. If you present it to characters, situations, and they see, it's a mirror, like, wait a minute, I do that. Exactly. And that's how I think.
Exactly.
And then it kind of gets the wheels spinning a little bit for people. And, and that's the thing I like about reading is that does happen. Oftentimes, like I said, reading is having a conversation with an author. So you read and they kind of, the beauty is, we have the words as writers. So we can paint a picture with those words that will let, any given reader see themselves, whether it be in this chapter or that chapter, this part of the story, that part of the conclusion, or the climax, the intro, any of that. So that's why I think protest art in some form or fashion is very important, because again, it's an entertaining way to educate somebody and kind of eliminate just a little bit of ignorance in an area or that area. And yeah, I definitely think, there's kind of I personally think there's kind of a moral responsibility
Mm-hmm.
that you have sometimes, and not all the time. Sometimes stuff is just fun.
Mm-hmm.
But I think, you know,
Well, and
there definitely is. Good.
it can be both. It can be
Right.
fun and and fulfilling, like a moral responsibility. It can be fun and educational, right? It
Right.
can be fun and eye opening, right? I mean,
Right.
to me, that's the best, right? You got a great
Right.
story. It's fun. You were taken on a journey. You were taken on a ride. And oh yeah, by the way, you just you were uh made privy to some behavior that you didn't realize was sexist or racist or
Right.
whatever the case may be, right? Or and it's funny, like I know some people who get really upset when people write um stories from the bad guy's perspective, right? So from
Yeah.
the antagonists, because they're like, well, I don't want a reader to empathize with this antagonist. And it's like, well, it's more than that, right?
Right.
It is enabling the reader to then say, to the point you were making earlier, oh, wait, I do that, right? It makes it
Right.
accessible to them, for that person to then take it that next step and say, holy crap, I do that. And like I associate with the reasoning behind this, but now I can see within context why this is awful,
Right.
right?
Right. And yeah, yeah, and that's definitely there's a power in that you have when you're able to do that. And I just think that's a good idea, kind of telling the story from like Wicked, telling the story from the antagonist point of view, and kind of I think Jordan Peele did that with I think what's it second movie? Jeez, it's his second film. I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head.
I'm happy to look it up now.
Yeah, okay, yeah, look it up.
But no, that's exactly it. That is 100% it. Yep.
It had Winston Duke and Lupita Nyong'o in it, but it was definitely the show kind of the not necessarily to show. I think when you do that kind of method, is to show
Oh, us.
our us, yes, us. But I think when you do that method, I think it's an opportunity when you tell from the antagonist perspective, it's an opportunity to focus on humanity. Like people have virtues and they have vices and things like that, and it allows the reader to understand that people are complex and not simply you're just all good, or all bad as the villain. People are complex. You have some of the traits of the hero, you have some of the traits of the villain, and I think it kind of teaches the trick is to balance those uh, in a productive way. So I definitely think yeah, I definitely think it's a good idea. Heck, I may even use it that device myself. So I think that's a good idea.
Yeah, I mean it can be incredibly effective, you know. And it also forces the author to write because it oftentimes, when if you're writing a protagonist or an antagonist, it can be very easy to write a two-dimensional character,
Yes,
right?
yes, yes.
And this forces, by writing it from the perspective of the antagonist, it forces the author to then take it to that another layer, right? Go
Right,
down one, two, three, four layers, because you don't want the guy just doing something, right? Or the woman
right,
just doing something. You want to have that reasoning behind it. So,
right. Definitely want to, because at that point, the reader asks themselves, or even the author, who's really the villain here? Because you write from the antagonist perspective, and I guess by the very nature of that perspective, the protagonist is the villain.
mm-hmm,
So it very much, I think, asks that question. Who should I be rooting for
mm-hmm.
in all this? So yeah, yeah. Anyway, that's a good. I'm glad you brought that up. That's a good one. I'm going to use that.
Leonard Pig also says imagination does run wild sometimes. Why, yes, it does.
It does. It does. It does. I think a lot of people think you have to. Uh, Imagination, I think, kind of in writing, I think it's like we're not as, I don't think you have to be as dependent on it. I think even if you're writing kind of sci-fi, horror, I think you can very much take real life and put it into those genres. It may be as simple as, uh, maybe as simple as, if you're writing sci-fi on another planet, you know, humanize them by giving them similar problems. Just change the method in which you deliver. If you're writing kind of people on another planet, aliens, and there's a war or something, you can very much talk about PTSD amongst aliens, like Alicia does, and you can very much talk about maybe anything, any problem or any kind of joy that people have. You can always put it into either inanimate objects or things that just aren't human. So a lot of people think, and I guess that's where the imagination does start to come in for stuff like that, because then you have to decide how are you going to deliver it, how are you going to deliver these very human problems, so that the reader relates to it in this kind of imaginative form, so that it's entertaining for the specific niche marketplace for that story.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, now I remember.
Okay.
Okay, so in the last, I want to say 2 weeks, something like that, I've gotten several people emailing me, asking like, hey, I got an offer from my novel from another publisher, but I really want to publish with you guys. So can you just go ahead and, you know, uh, fast forward your process and let me know if you're going to publish me, or can you just go ahead and pick me up, or whatever the case may be. So first, I want to say, thank you. That's a huge compliment.
Right.
In pretty much every case, the individual mentioned that they reached out to our authors, and the authors just raved about us, which again, excuse me, huge thank you. I mean, that's a big compliment. We work very hard to make sure that it's a collaborative environment, right?
Right.
Where our editors work in a collaborative way with the authors. We have product managers who work with the editors and the authors, just to going back to the whole niche thing, right? To sit down and figure out like what are the different areas that would make the most sense to market the books. What are the different perspectives that we could take? All that kind of stuff. Everybody just works super, super hard. And, I feel incredibly blessed to have absolutely everybody on board who we have on board, and anyone who will be joining us in the future. That said, I do ask that if, our process is one where, I literally, I sit down and I go through every single one of the submissions. I'm the one who does the initial pass through. I'm the one who initially accepts or declines a submission. And then what happens after I've done the first pass through, our editors then go through, and poor Chris has been going through this now, and they pick the stories that they want to work on, right? And we pick for what catalog, which that basically means what year those stories will be selected. If your story, if you have not heard from us, that actually means it's still in the running. And so that's a huge thing. But I'll be honest, I don't think it's fair to reach out to us and say, and say, hey, can you go ahead and put me at the front of the line because I have another publisher who is interested in me. Although I completely understand the desire and I completely understand the thought behind it. We only publish 15 to 20 books a year. And I'm going to tell you right now, just for Running Wild alone, not even looking at RIZE, but just for Running Wild, we have over 100 books that are in the potential to be published pile for 2022. And we already have half of our slate filled. So, obviously we're not going to be able to publish all of them. Right. And what that also means, though, is we won't decline it, right? We won't decline it unless our editors come back and they say, Lisa, you're on crack cocaine. I have no idea why you said this is a potential for us to publish, right? You know, if our editors come back and say that, then I'll, you know, go back and I'll decline it. But otherwise, it'll stay in the maybe pile until we actually publish it, right? So
Right.
again, until either we publish it or until our editors turn around and say, Lisa, you've lost your mind. You know, we shouldn't put this forward. So, you know, I ask you to give us the same consideration that you would give any other publisher. And if you want to publish with us, I'm fine with you emailing us and saying, hey, am I in the running? But please don't email me. And I think in the last 2 weeks, I've had 6 different people reach out to me.
Wow.
So please don't come out to us and ask, am I in, are you going to publish me in 2022 or 2023? I'll let you know if you're in the running or not, but it's not fair to then basically force our editors to go back and try and convince them that they have to publish you. That's just not fair.
Right.
And we don't have the bandwidth to do it, right?
Right.
We only do 15 to 20 books a year, and that includes our anthologies, by the way.
Right.
So, you know, again, it's a huge compliment. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. But please stop doing that, because I'm actually going to stop responding to you. Yeah. So.
Right. Yeah. We all hate having to wait to kind of hear something back, but there is a process. It's just one that can't be, you know, circumvented. You know, it's not. But my advice, if you have another publisher who's interested in your do it, because who's to say we may read your manuscript and we may feel like it's not right for us, but you've already found somebody who does think so. So I would, you know, I get if you would want to wait, but you know, who knows? So I would just say, you know, research that publisher and see if there's somebody who believes in your stuff, who'd push your stuff. Because again, we may read it and decide, you know, while the writing may be good, we may not want to. We just may not want to publish it ourselves. So I would definitely look into that opportunity as well. This isn't to say we wouldn't like it, but there is an opportunity, a chance that, you know, we just may not find it to be something that we want to publish. So
and no one understand that, like someone had mentioned, you know, that some of other small publishers, they don't offer any assistance with marketing or publicity. Understand that it doesn't matter who you're with. You could go with Penguin. You could go with Macmillan, right? You could go with anybody. You as an author, you are going to still have to do work.
Right.
Period. Right. That is just how it is. And it's actually a lot of times, you know, when you're putting yourself out there, a lot of these venues, they don't want to hear from the publisher. They want to hear from the author. So, you know, keep all of this in mind, that, you know, even if you got into writing because you wanted to tell a great story or whatever the case may be, and you're not interested in the marketing publicity side of it, the reality is that no matter where you go, you are going to have to do it.
Right.
That is just the name of the game.
Right. A lot of writers think they write the book, give it to the publisher, they put it out, and they just sit back and watch royalties come in. And it's like, no, you have to hustle a little bit. Yeah, definitely. Like you said, even with the big five, you still have to go out and market and do the things that it takes to get visibility. And kind of going back to what we talked about when we first started this segment, in kind of knowing your niche market. Now, you know, I would imagine that the bigger publishers may have a little more knowledge on that because they've been around longer. So there's this kind of, you know, they kind of have all this data and statistics on certain marketplaces. But, you know, this doesn't mean they'll push you like they'll push, you know, I don't know, you know, Stephen King or something. You know, it's different. It's like, you know, smaller publishers, take far more care with a piece. There's almost an emotional attachment that we have sometimes as editors too, because we spent so much. I mean, we work with you. It's not like you you know, you did write it yourself, but it's collaborative. And we choose these books, manuscripts that we like, because we resonate with the story, we like the story, and we want to work on it. It's fun. You know what I mean? So, but sometimes with bigger publishers, it may not be like that. But I know you may work with an editor, but it's not, as far as the marketing of it, you know, it's a business. So if you're not somebody who can, they say, okay, we can make X amount of dollars on this manuscript, you know, as a formula, then you got to decide how much money you're going to spend on marketing the manuscript, as opposed to somebody believing in your work and pushing it kind of as much as they can, because they worked on it and they actually care about the story, as opposed to, yes, it's business, and you know, businesses want to make money, but there's a little bit more of a sentimental value that comes with some smaller publishers.
Yep, no, it's true. And oftentimes that's why they're picking up the story, right?
Right.
There's something that personally resonates. They're not basing the acquisition based on, you know, market numbers of like how a similar dark fiction piece or a similar romance had done in the marketplace, right? So absolutely keep that in mind. Leonard Pig asks, do either of you have a preferred genre?
Mine is crime fiction. I love crime. I love kind of bank robbers and you know, mafias, I mean, and all that stuff. The biggest reason I've asked myself why, but I just think it's the intricate planning that goes into performing a heist or something, or that goes into trying to kind of just get away with the plan, you know, and then what happens when the plan goes sour, and how they kind of get out of it, and you know, if they make it or not. And I typically like when they make it out. I'll be honest. But yeah, that's my favorite.
So I don't have a preferred genre. I think it's more, I have several. So I love magical realism. I love dark fiction. I love thrillers. Yeah, I'd say those are the big ones.
Yeah, thrillers are good. You get through them pretty quickly. They're page turners. That's the good thing about thrillers. I think that's why they're so popular. People get to sit down and read and get lost in a book. I've read a book. It wouldn't be considered a thriller, but it kind of read like it. I don't know. It kind of read like it, and I read it in a day.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't a huge book, but yeah, I read it in a day. I bought it, sat down to read it. It's called The Coldest Winter Ever by Sister Soldier, and yeah, I just sat down and I got lost. I didn't even realize how long I'd been reading until like the last third of the book. You know, I was like, geez, and I just finished it, and that's kind of, there's an enjoyment in that, kind of finishing a book, because it is kind of it's sometimes it's work to kind of finish a book, because the longer a piece is, like the more room there is for kind of the lull moments where you kind of have to work, because every now and then you'll be reading a book and there's like a chapter here and there that you have to kind of really work to get through, because you're just not as entertained. And then, you know, you read until you get to the next place that kind of entertains you. So with thrillers, it almost feels like that doesn't happen. It's almost like that's completely eliminated. And every chapter, you know, every page, every chapter is something that you can't wait to get to the next one. So yeah, but definitely, yeah, for me, crime though, and yeah, and I mean, I don't know, I read a lot of nonfiction too. I read a lot of nonfiction, but that's just because I like to take real life things and put them into a story. So I may read, you know, anything. I'll read nonfiction on anything. And two, the internet and social media has made reading nonfiction a little bit easier, because there's a lot more journalism. Now, granted, you have to filter your own sources and where you go, but that's a lot too. Now, I don't read mostly just articles and stuff. I read books, but That's also a good way to, because when you're writing, you have to consume as many words as you can all the time. You just always have to be reading. That's just the nature of it. It's part of writing. And if you don't have time to read, you don't have time to write. So yeah, yeah, nonfiction and crime, I think. Yeah.
Cool. Makes sense.
Well, I jeez, let me see if I have another. Give me 1 second. I have another
Sure.
question for you.
We've only got 7 minutes left, so just for anybody who's watching, I'm Lisa Kastner, and I'm here with Chris Major, and we are part of Running Wild Press, where we publish great stories with great writing. And we are here every Wednesday at 4 p.m. Pacific time, 7 p.m. Eastern time, to answer any questions that you may have. If you are watching this and it is not 4 p.m. Pacific time or 7 p.m. Eastern time, that's not a big deal. Go ahead and pop your questions in the comments section. We always, always, always check during the week, and we will always get back to you in the subsequent Wednesday. So keep that in mind.
Okay, so my question, with the internet and technology, where do you see actually printed books going? Like, what direction do you see that going in?
I think there'll always be printed books. I think what's going to end up happening is that the technology around printing the actual books it's going to get better and better. There was a time where it would take months to print a book, right? Because you literally had to set little pieces of metal or little pieces of wood that had a letter on it,
Yeah.
and in a press, and then you had to lay out the ink, and then you had to lay out the paper, right?
Right.
And I mean, yeah. And today it's all digital. I think that they're just going to come up with more and more technologies that are going to make it easier and easier. I think we're probably going to end up with more technologies that are going to make it the experience of reading digitally more attractive or effective.
Right.
Like I've read some Kindle books that they were actually able to integrate more like interactive mediums into the book itself, which made it just like mind-blowingly awesome, right? So
Right.
I think if from a digital medium perspective, it's if it is matured so that, or as it can, if publishers continue to mature the publishing of those stories so that they are really leveraging that interface, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that it's not treated as a flat file, it's not treated as if it's a piece of paper, but it's treated where you can actually have moving images within it, right?
Right.
Or it's more of an interactive experience within the story itself. I think we're going to see a lot of that. I think too, some books started off with integration where it'll take you to a website. I think we'll probably see it where we'll have heavier integrations like that, but with a website that's dedicated to that book, right? So
Right.
it's seamless to you as a reader. You may not even realize that you've just gone off to a website or you've gone off to a mobile app of some capacity. But it extends your experience. It extends the story for you so that, let's say if it's a thriller, maybe at the end of it, it takes you to an app where you are now the protagonist and you are going through a maze associated with this thriller, right? Or with this crime fiction story,
Right.
or whatever, right? So you are now an integral part of the story. I think we're going to see a lot more things like that where we're really extending the entertainment experience. But I don't think we'll ever get not have paperbacks. I don't think we'll ever not have hardbacks. I think what'll probably happen is, like, especially with hardbacks, they'll become more and more treated like limited edition.
Yeah, I think so too.
Right.
That's what I was gonna say.
But I think paperbacks, it's more so that it's just going to get cheaper and faster and easier to publish within that format. But I think we're going to see much heavier integration across other like digital mediums, so that we're not limiting the story so that it's only about a story that's on the page, but we're extending the story so that it's about the characters and the narrative being leveraged across different platforms. Does that make
Right.
sense?
Right. Yes, it does. It does.
So cool. Okay. With that, I think we're going to tie things up. So, Chris, thank you again for another amazing Wednesday and another set of fantastic questions. And I want to thank everybody who has joined us. We love, love, love your questions. We love having you join us every week. And if you, again, are watching this and it is not a Wednesday at between 4 and 5 p.m. Pacific time, or 7 and 8 p.m. Eastern time, not a big deal. Just go ahead, toss your questions in the comments section, and we will answer them next week. All right.
Yeah.
Love you guys, and we will see you in a week. Ciao.